that they may have learned to accept me differently and the skills that I've learned to behave differently, we've never done those together. It would require a controlled environment for that exposure to occur. Otherwise, we would end up like your brother and sister that live there, where there's a lot of exposure and it's a shit show every single time.
Right.
Because nobody has been there to create a controlled environment where the exposure and the efforts are able to be practiced and reciprocated safely. That's why I'm a huge advocate for family therapy for adults, like not just mom, dad, little kids, but adult children with their parents. It can be very healing because the therapist helps manage the environment so that the changed behavior is modeled and practiced safely.
Sure, absolutely. I agree with everything that you just said. I'm not saying that space is the key factor.
Definitely
simply
not.
That it is a factor. And in this, for instance, say my brother was in a place where he was ready to understand. It might be improved if we were closer, but he would have to be in a place where he's ready to understand. And that's not the case. So space or no space doesn't matter at this point in time. But if that were to happen, then space might be helpful.
Yes.
So, and that's all I'm saying is that there's other factors there too. But don't forget, read the room. Like, be as close as you want to somebody. If they're not in a place or you're not in a place to be able to work through this, it's not going to happen.
Right. I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So let's talk about organizational dishonesty, or where organizations, religions, corporations, governmental, entities, whatever, when they're being dishonest, what is the root cause? And from my perspective, I would say the root cause is still fear. Based on our experiential expertise, so the organization that Mason, you and I have been in that we feel has been dishonest, that, and for the purposes of this podcast, would be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church.
Right.
And so, Mason, you prepared a couple of examples. Let's go through these examples one by one. And what I want to do is be able to point out potential fears. Now, I'm not saying that my statement of this is probably what they were afraid of is factual or true, but I would say in an attempt to understand why the Mormon Church might be having a difficult time being honest or owning and becoming accountable for their dishonesty is, again, because of fear.
Sure. And this is practice, right? As an example, if you're lying to me and I sit with myself and try and just think about, well, what are some of the reasons that she might be lying to me? It might be a helpful practice for me to just kind of recognize maybe I could be more empathetic. And then when I go to you and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. I feel like you're lying to me. Can we talk about this? I might be better prepared for whatever is going on.
Right.
And in this case, with a church or an organization, same sort of thing. If you can sit and think, well, why might they be doing this? It can help you to understand that organization a little better. In this case, you may not be able to go to the organization and say, this is what I think, what's going on?
Well, and I want to kind of reiterate what you said there. If I understand why my children are lying to me, if I can go, okay, what are they afraid of? What's going on here? I'm able to shift the environment so that I become a safe person that can hold and handle the truth
Right.
without creating that fear response. So once again, I come back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, tier number 3 of that, and tier number 2, safety and belonging. If I'm able to say, hey, my kid is lying to me because they're afraid of getting into trouble, we really have some, life lessons here. If I can shift out of, okay, you're not going to be in trouble, let's just understand what's going on for you, and then
Right.
how can we make sure this doesn't happen in the future, I'm increasing the chances that my kids are going to be honest with me. Where if I'm like, you lied, you're grounded for a month, and you don't get your iPad, well, what I'm doing is I'm creating an environment where that child's most likely going to lie to me again.
Right.
So what is my purpose? I mean, I'm not saying don't discipline dishonest behavior, but you have to make sure that that discipline is conducted in a way that the person who is lying feels emotionally safe, physically safe, loved, and like they belong.
Frontal cortex, right? They're not going to be able to
Cortex
put
and
together.
amygdala.
They're not going to be able to put together the fact that, well, if I don't lie, then I'll be in a better place. Oftentimes they put together, well, I just need to lie a little better next time.
Yup. Absolutely.
So anyway, there's a list here. I didn't necessarily want to talk about all of these things, but if you want to go through them a little bit.
Let's just do an example or two. So go ahead and start with the example of dishonesty.
So there's a few things. If you look at just historically, there's the rock and the hat, where Joseph Smith was translating from the seer stone in the hat rather than from actually looking at the plates, or the Urim and Thummim, which was provided for him.
Right. So let's slow this down. So Mason, how old were you when you found out that Joseph Smith used a rock and a hat rather than what you had been told from primary and from the illustrations and the artwork of the church? How old were you?
Maybe 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
43.
So 43 years old. When did the church know that that's what he had done?
I don't actually know that for sure. I know that there's been talk about it and there's been comments made, but I'm not sure.
Right. I think if I'm remembering correctly, we know that at least Joseph, is it Fielding Smith? Is it Joseph Fielding Smith that like ripped the pages out, or was that
Yes.
Joseph F. Smith? So Joseph Fielding Smith knew, and based on the documentation and the journal entries and the information that we have that looks objectively factual, Joseph Fielding Smith knew and continued the misrepresentation.
Right.
So the question is, why would prophets, seers, and revelators feel like it's okay to continue to misrepresent the truth? And I'm going to say misrepresent rather than bold-faced lie, because I don't have any evidence that says, did Joseph Smith use a rock and a hat to translate the Book of Mormon? And somebody saying, no, it didn't happen that way in my lifetime. I don't have any information. I'm sure somebody somewhere has something, because one person may have, who knows who may have said it not knowing what the truth was. You were 43 before you knew that the peepstone was used.
My experience is that it is that they're holding back information.
Right, so lying by omission. So what are some of the reasons that somebody might do that?
Not having an explanation. Feeling like you cannot explain why that is the case.
Fear of not having the right answer.
And consequently, so in a church organization, I feel like the fear of not having the right answer leads to the fear of, well, somebody's going to walk away and it's going to be partially my fault.
Right.
And I think that that's kind of bred into the church, that if we don't have the right answers and someone leaves on account of that, somehow I'm responsible for that. And so there's a big fear there. Okay. I think.
Okay, I can say that. Yeah, that would make sense. And again, we're supposing and assuming here, so please recognize this as assuming. We might be making an ass out of you and me, But
well, it's just practice.
This is that right. We're demonstrating that understanding. From my perspective, I would say that utilizing a rock and a hat to find treasure and the mythological belief and stuff probably wasn't as voodoo or weird then as it is today. We know that there was a magical worldview during Joseph Smith's day. We know that treasure hunting with peepstones and those types of things were very common in that day and age. So my guess is that in Joseph Smith's time, having the plate somewhere in a peepstone really wasn't that odd, because it was accepted by the people that Joseph Smith was engaged in it with. We can, I think, safely assume that Oliver Cowdery and Emma Smith and Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young knew that Joseph Smith had a stone in a hat with his face buried in the hat dictating the Book of Mormon. And it wasn't weird to them. It was normal for them. Somewhere along the line, it became odd. And maybe the nuance of that's how it was done changed and people started making art. I don't know if this was we purposefully covered this up, or if it was we outgrew the story and then we inserted different things, and people just naturally started to assume. And so the discovery of, no, it was actually this way, was a little bit like, whoa, wait a minute. Everybody's going to think that's crazy. My thought is that it was covered up. It was not brought out and taught to us because it was weird. There's already a lot of weird, mystical, magical things in the, origin story. How much more mystical can it get? So I think there was also probably a fear of people wouldn't believe in the church and the church would fall apart.
Yeah. I think that back then it probably just didn't matter why, like the details of how it had happened didn't matter, because if the Book of Mormon is true, then the Book of Mormon is true, and the exact details of how he translated it, no big deal. Right,
and it wasn't an issue that the church really had to address out loud. Again, that kind of lying by omission, like why bring it up? This is working. Well, until the day of the internet came, and then suddenly we've got all kinds of access to a very different narrative. And now in this day and age, if somebody came to me and said, hey, this rock in the hat told me that this book is true, I'm going to be like, yeah, F off. This is not, you're wackadoo. Well, if you come to me like that, I'm going to be like, hey, let's go talk to somebody about getting some antipsychotics going. That's going to be my initial response. Because it just doesn't feel or seem real. We no longer live in a world with that type of mysticism being the norm.
What if you could have a career where the opportunities are as vast as our nation, where it's not about mission statements, but a shared mission? At U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we go beyond to protect more than borders. From ship to shore, air to ground, cities to local communities, CBP agents and officers are keeping people safe. Join U.S. Customs and Border Protection and go beyond for something far greater than yourself. Learn more at cbp.gov/careers.